Hi there. Thanks for having me. First off, before I get into something, I want to talk about something that has absolutely nothing to do with public transportation, and it has to do with my cell phone company. And my cell phone company, literally this happened 3 days ago, they canceled my plan, which I really liked, and they jacked up the price, doubled it, didn't tell me about it, and then sent me a bill for it. So of course I called them and said, well, what happened here? And what they said was, well, my plan had expired, and that the only way that I could get that plan again was if I bought a new phone from them and signed up for a brand new 3-year contract. That was the only way I would get that deal again, even though I'd been with them for 10 years. Basically, they were saying that a new customer was far more valuable to them than a customer that had been with them for 10 years. If you're wondering, it's TELUS, just so you know. And I think that one of the interesting things about that is that reading through all the material that Fusion Halifax sent me about transit in Halifax is I think there's something similar to that analogy going on right now here. So many of the transit plans that I'm reading here are really focused on areas like Brentwood and Sackville. How do we get people from Brentwood and Sackville to use transit to come into the downtown core? But the problem is that the overwhelming majority of your transit users are not coming from Brentwood and Sackville. They're coming from the Halifax mainland, they're coming from the peninsula, and they're coming from Dartmouth. Why then are we focused on getting people from Brentwood and Sackville to come into the downtown core? That's not to say that Brentwood and Sackville aren't important. It's just to say that why are we focused on them when everyone who uses transit in your city is coming from the downtown core? How would you feel if you're one of those regular, loyal transit users who's been using transit for the last 10 years, and you see something like a beautiful high-speed rail corridor or a BRT system or a high-speed catamaran ferry or whatever they're talking about, getting people from Brentwood and Sackville downtown, and you're still using the old bus that you've always been using? They're basically saying to you, well, we're more interested in going after that other piece of the pie than taking care of the core users. And I think that is something that I would encourage you to really focus on, is take care of your core. Those are the people that are going to build your transit reputation. Those are the people who are going to use transit day in and day out. I read a study that suggested that a commuter rail line going up to Brentwood and Sackville would bring in 741 riders per day. And pardon me, and that to operate that
Stephen,
line. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you mean Bedford, right? Not Brentwood.
Did I say
Bedford?
Brentwood? I mean Bedford.
Bedford.
I'm sorry. Brentwood, that's in Los Angeles, right? I'm sorry about that. But Bedford, yes. And that to operate that line was going to cost $9 million a year. Now just average that out. And of course we know that transit is always subsidized by government, but that means you're spending over $9,000 a person per year to get these people from Bedford and Sackville down into the core. Just doesn't make a lot of sense, maybe. Focus on your core, get your core, treat your core right, and give them what they deserve and what they need, and they will reward you, and then grow from there. Yes, eventually you do need to go into Bedford and Sackville, but maybe not right now, maybe not with high-speed commuter rail lines and ferries and that. One of the other things that I think that's really important is when you're looking at transit and when you're doing your work today is to deal with the issue of multimodality. I'm not sure how many of you know anything about the history of transit in Cincinnati, Ohio, but they actually had one of the most fascinating transit systems ever, and almost no one knows about it. The problem in Cincinnati was that as the city was growing in around the 1920s, they were severely geographically constrained. They had a lot of mountains around them, and the city was growing, and they had an extensive tram network. So the problem was that suddenly villages were popping up on the hillsides, and they had no way to get their transit systems up there. So what did they do? They invented these things. These were the inclined railways or the Cincinnati funiculars. And what they basically were cable-pulled platforms similar to an elevator that allowed a streetcar to drive onto the funicular bed, be carried up to the top of the mountain, and then they could continue on their way. It was a brilliant example of two technologies working together to solve a problem. And I think it's just a beautiful example because it is tool-based. And in the last 30 years, I think we've gotten away from this idea of multimodality, and we've gotten towards this idea of what I call techno-zealotry, which is where, for whatever reason, we adopt one technology and we bring it into our heart for purely ideological reasons, and we say, you know, my technology is the fastest, and it's the cheapest, and it's the best, and it'll cause the greatest social need, and praise be to God, can I get a hallelujah on this side of the room, right? Like, that's what we do, for whatever reason. I don't quite understand it. And I'd like to believe, especially the conversations that I've had with these gentlemen here and the other conversations that I have been hearing recently, that I think we're moving back to a multimodal perspective. Because what we're learning is the car by itself doesn't work. The bus itself doesn't work, right? Biking doesn't work by itself. Walking doesn't work by itself. It's about how you use them all together. Just give me a second. And one of the reasons I think a city like Halifax could adopt a policy of multimodality is that you're already 100% more multimodal than virtually every other city in North America. And that might surprise you, but think about it. You've got buses and you've got ferries. Most cities only have buses. You're already halfway there, okay? So when you're thinking about this, think about many, many different ideas. Now, I know, you know, I'm here because I'm the cable guy, I'm the gondola guy and the ski lift guy, so I'll give you a couple quick images, but I'm not saying the gondolas are the answer. But why couldn't you consider something like this? Especially given the fact that you are in an area that is geographically and topographically constrained. You have severe inclines, and you have a lot of bays, and you have a harbor crossing. I've read various estimates that a new bridge crossing of the harbor would cost 1.5 billion, which means 2 billion. Could you possibly consider instead something like that? Now again, I'm not saying that this is the solution. There is no silver bullet, and I try really hard not to be like I'm the gondola zealot. It's just one of many, many different options. Again, New York, and this is one of my favorite images. This is a car factory in Slovakia that's basically crossing a highway using the exact same technology, moving cars. There's now discussions about could you actually use that technology in place of a car ferry system? It's possible. So I would just encourage you that in this process, when you're sitting around the table, to just really ask yourselves, what are the options that are out there? And not get wedded to the gondola, right? Like some of you might go, oh my God, that's the greatest idea, and that's all you want to do. Don't do that. That's wrong, right? There's a lot of places that gondolas will not make a lot of sense. In fact, 95% of the situations, they won't make sense. But that's oftentimes the case with a lot of technologies. So the last about the gondola stuff. The last point that I want to make, and this is something that's very, very important to me, and I think is something that we often forget about in public transportation. Just because you build something doesn't mean people are going to use it, right? The marketing of your transit is essential. Now, when I say marketing, I don't mean advertising. Advertising is part of marketing, but it is not marketing. Marketing are the set of strategies and tactics that you use to bring a product to market. And if those strategies and those tactics do not align with your overall goals, your system will not be ridden. Perfect example of that, I can think of two perfect examples of this. One is in Switzerland. Now, Switzerland has a very, very interesting strategy that they use. And what they do is they have something called the Halbtax card, which means half tax. And it's available to any resident in Switzerland for 150 francs. So it's like 150, 160 bucks Canadian. Pay for it every year, you get it, it's got your photo on it, and it gives you half-price fares across the entire transportation network of all of Switzerland. Every train, every cable car, every city, every metro system, everything. The key here is it's not available to tourists. So what does that mean? It means that basically you're able to drive down the price of transportation for your locals while allowing the tourists to subsidize your locals' ridership. That may not sound like marketing, but it very much is marketing because it is built into the product, and you're trying to bring that product to market. Another perfect example is Calgary Transit. Calgary, we all know, most of us are Canadian, I assume here, that Calgary has this reputation for being car-centric, that it's just a sea of cars everywhere. Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that Calgary has some of the highest transit ridership in Canada and North America as well. Doesn't make a lot of sense when you first hear that. Why is that? Well, Calgary Transit worked really, really hard with City Hall to say, we need you to artificially make the price of parking sky high. Okay? City Hall said yes. Just give me a sec. Calgary now has the highest parking rate in all of Canada and the second highest in North America. Only New York is higher than Calgary. You want to park in downtown Calgary? It'll cost you minimum $25. Now imagine you've got a two-car family, insurance, parking, everything, and both of the parents work downtown and both of them drive. That becomes prohibitively expensive, and you can't do it. So what do? People drive. People take transit. Compare that to something like Tampa Bay in the States. Tampa Bay, to park in the central business district for the whole day is $1. Right? Less than a bus ticket. Think about that. That right there is marketing. If the cost of parking your car is less than your transit fare, what chance does transit have? Meanwhile, you go to Tampa and there are highways like nothing you've ever seen. They are like white as that tablecloth and concrete and beautiful, and they're everywhere, and parking is plenty and all of that. There's no way you can get transit ridership in Tampa. The last statistics I read about Tampa was 2% of the population use public transit on a regular basis. Of that 2%, only 20% use it for commuting purposes, which means that commuters, who are the bulk of your transit users in Tampa Bay, that means 0.4% of residents of Tampa Bay are using it for commuting purposes. So again, how you market and how you build your transit system is not just about wheels and tracks. It's about the entire system, it's about the entire policy, and it's about the strategies and tactics you use to not force people to use it, but to casually persuade them to use it. And that's all I got to say. Thanks.